I am Elena Whitmore, and I am 36 years old. I had always known my sister did not like me. That truth had lived quietly between us for as long as I could remember, woven into silences, glances, and small exclusions that were easy to dismiss but impossible to ignore. What I never imagined was that her cruelty would arrive disguised as generosity, wrapped in silver paper, delivered with laughter, and presented as a gift. The birthday dinner was held at the Whitmore estate in Hawthorne Ridge, a place admired for its symmetry and restraint. Outsiders called it elegant. To me, it had always felt cold, beautiful in the way museums are beautiful, impressive but untouched by warmth. That evening, the long dining table gleamed beneath a chandelier that cast soft golden light, reflecting off polished cutlery and crystal glasses arranged with meticulous care. Everything was designed to suggest celebration, harmony, and family. None of it was real. Before I continue, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach people who need them, especially those who understand what it means to be hurt by the very place meant to protect you. My sister, Clarissa Whitmore, waited patiently. She did not rush the moment. She let the meal unfold perfectly. Appetizers, main course, wine refilled too often by my mother's unsteady hand. Only after the dessert plates were cleared did Clarissa slide a small silver-wrapped box across the table toward me. She laughed as she did it. Light. Casual. Precisely timed. "I thought you deserved honesty this year," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to arrest every movement at the table. When I opened the box and saw the DNA testing kit inside, the air changed. It didn't explode. It didn't shatter. It tightened. Clarissa leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "Maybe this will finally explain why you always felt like someone else's mistake." The words landed cleanly. Loud enough to humiliate. Precise enough to wound. I did not cry. I closed the box slowly, carefully, as if it contained something fragile instead of something meant to destroy me. Across the table, my mother, Evelyn Whitmore, went pale. Her smile collapsed as though it had been held in place by effort alone. My father, Richard Whitmore, had been buried 4 months earlier, and his absence pressed harder than his presence ever had. That was when I understood something far more frightening than the insult itself. This was not a joke. This was not impulse. This was a planned exposure. And somewhere in that room, the truth had been known long before I was invited to discover it. Most people describe family as refuge. For me, it had always felt like architecture, designed to impress outsiders while quietly freezing those who lived inside it. Growing up in the Whitmore house taught me the art of invisibility early. I learned to speak only when spoken to succeed quietly, to shrink so Clarissa could expand uninterrupted. Clarissa had a presence that demanded attention without earning it. Her laughter filled rooms. Her opinions dominated conversations. My mother rewarded this dominance, mistaking volume for confidence and entitlement for strength. When Clarissa brought home average grades, Evelyn praised her effort loudly. When I earned academic honors, they were acknowledged briefly before I was asked to help clear the table. My father noticed. He never named the imbalance, but his approval came in quiet gestures, a nod, a hand resting briefly on my shoulder. That restraint shaped me more than praise ever could. By 36, I had built a life defined by predictability and calm. I worked as a risk strategist, dressed in neutral colors, and followed routines that kept emotional surprises at bay. Distance had allowed me to breathe, to believe the ache of childhood neglect belonged to the past. Then my father died. Grief reactivated gravity. The family orbit tightened, pulling me back toward Hawthorne Ridge and into patterns I believed I had escaped. The birthday dinner was framed as tradition, but I sensed the tension the moment I arrived. Everything felt rehearsed, controlled, intentionally personal. My mother's greeting was too bright, her words slightly delayed as though each sentence had been practiced. Clarissa barely looked up from the travel brochures scattered across the kitchen counter, glowing from recent vacations and self-satisfaction. Wine flowed freely into my mother's glass, though she rarely drank it. Her fingers circled the stem repeatedly, as if anchoring herself. Conversation revolved around Clarissa's career, Clarissa's marriage, Clarissa's future plans. When I spoke, the room dulled. When I gently asked about my father's will, the reaction was immediate. My mother froze, then dismissed the question with a strained smile. "We're not ready for that yet," she said, her eyes flicking toward Clarissa. Clarissa smirked. That was when I realized the dinner had never been about celebrating me. It was a stage, and I had been positioned carefully at its center. Later that night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I searched through remnants of a life that no longer felt like mine. The walls were still painted the pale gray I'd chosen at 16, preserved like a museum exhibit of someone else's past. At the back of my closet, beneath boxes untouched for years, I noticed an envelope that had been disturbed recently. Inside was a photograph. My mother stood younger and uncertain, holding a newborn me, beside a man I had never seen before. On the back, written in her careful script, were 2 words. "Forgive me." I photographed everything before returning the envelope exactly where I found it. Clarissa had not invented the insult. She had revealed a truth deliberately withheld. The DNA kit sat unopened on the desk. It no longer felt threatening. I mailed it the next morning, not out of obedience, but out of necessity. I refused to let Clarissa control the narrative. Waiting for the results was less agonizing than I expected. When they arrived 5 weeks later, clarity replaced dread. No biological relation to the Whitmore family. A confirmed genetic match instead to the Harlan line. A name unfamiliar but undeniable. The realization did not devastate me. It explained everything. I shared the results in the family group chat without commentary. Within seconds, my mother called, her voice breaking, not with remorse but panic. She begged me to delete the message, insisting the past should remain buried. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of harm. Only fear of exposure. Clarissa did not call. She sent 4 words instead. "Now you finally know." When I confronted her later, she admitted what had been building beneath the surface for years. She had protected the secret, leveraged it, and waited for the right moment to use it. She believed disclosure would erase me. What she didn't anticipate was resistance. Elena did not rush to respond after confronting Clarissa. Silence, she had learned, was not weakness when it was chosen. It was space. And space was where clarity lived. The days following the DNA results unfolded with an eerie calm. Elena returned to her apartment in Clearhaven, a coastal city several hours away from Hawthorne Ridge, where the streets were narrow and the mornings smelled faintly of salt and coffee. Distance softened the noise but sharpened her thoughts. The revelation did not unravel her sense of self the way Clarissa had intended. Instead, she had been tolerated, not claimed. Her phone buzzed often during that first week. Extended relatives reached out cautiously, circling the truth without naming it. Old family friends sent messages heavy with concern but light on substance. Elena responded politely, briefly, and without elaboration. The story was not public property. She would not become a spectacle simply because the truth made others uncomfortable. The one call she answered without hesitation came from Marianne Cole, her father's longtime assistant. Marianne's voice was steady, professional, but tinged with something else, relief. "He wanted you to know," Marianne said quietly. "He prepared for this." That sentence changed everything. 2 days later, Elena sat across from Eleanor Grant, an inheritance attorney whose reputation for dismantling quiet manipulation was well known in legal circles. Eleanor's office overlooked the financial district, all glass and sharp lines, a place where sentiment was acknowledged but never allowed to interfere with precision. They reviewed documents methodically. Eleanor asked few questions, but the ones she did ask cut directly to the point. Elena answered honestly, without embellishment. "Your father anticipated resistance," Eleanor said finally, "and he planned accordingly." The meeting that followed was scheduled quickly. Thomas Ridley, the Whitmore estate lawyer, requested urgency that bordered on panic. Elena recognized the shift immediately. Control was slipping, and those who relied on it were scrambling to reassert it. The morning of the meeting arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather Hawthorne Ridge seemed to reserve for reckoning. Elena traveled with Eleanor to the upper floors of a downtown tower, whose mirrored exterior reflected a city that suddenly felt distant and unfamiliar. Thomas Ridley's office was designed to convey authority, dark wood, minimalist decor, carefully curated restraint. He waited until everyone was seated before speaking. Evelyn Whitmore arrived first, visibly diminished. Her posture had collapsed inward, hands clenched around her handbag, as though it were the last thing anchoring her to certainty. She avoided Elena's eyes entirely. Clarissa entered last. Her heels struck the marble floor with deliberate confidence. She wore a tailored ivory suit and the expression of someone certain the room would bend to her will. Her attorney followed closely, projecting assurance that felt rehearsed. Clarissa smiled at Elena without warmth, already convinced the outcome was inevitable. Thomas placed a thick folder on the table and paused. Richard Whitmore anticipated this moment, he said evenly. What follows was prepared with full awareness of the circumstances now before us. That was the first time Clarissa's expression faltered. Thomas began reading. The will was precise, deliberate, unmistakably intentional. 65% of the estate, including the family home, investment portfolios, and controlling interests, was left to Elena Whitmore. The room fractured into stunned silence. Clarissa rose abruptly, her chair scraping sharply against the floor. She objected loudly, invoking the DNA results as proof Elena had no legal claim. Thomas raised a hand, unshaken. The will addresses that explicitly, he said, continuing without pause. Richard Whitmore had known since Elena's early childhood that she was not his biological daughter. He had chosen to raise her regardless. His reasoning required no justification. He described her discipline, her integrity, her quiet resilience. Clarissa's composure deteriorated with every sentence. Evelyn closed her eyes, her face tightening as years of avoidance collapsed into consequence. Then Thomas introduced the investigation Richard had commissioned months before his death. Documents were distributed. Unauthorized withdrawals. Recorded meetings with estate advisors. Evidence of pressure applied during Richard's illness. Clarissa's attorney stiffened, scanning the pages rapidly. The final item was a handwritten letter, read aloud at Richard's request. It addressed Clarissa directly. There was no anger in it, no accusation, only certainty. He acknowledged her actions. He named the choices she had made, and he outlined the consequences she would now face. For the first time, Clarissa looked unsteady. The fallout moved quickly. Clarissa's attorney advised against contesting the will, citing the airtight no-contest clause and overwhelming documentation. She ignored him. Emotion overtook strategy. She accused Elena of manipulation, of exploiting a dying man. Eleanor responded calmly, outlining the legal reality with precision. Any challenge would not only fail but trigger immediate penalties, including repayment of outstanding debts. Clarissa argued the funds she had taken were gifts. Thomas corrected her without raising his voice. The records classified them clearly as loans. Evelyn attempted to intervene, her voice thin and ineffective. Clarissa refused to listen. Years of entitlement collapsed into accusation and disbelief. When the challenge was dismissed days later, the outcome was swift. Clarissa forfeited her inheritance entirely. The debt remained hers alone. Elena felt no triumph, no satisfaction. The resolution was not vindication. It was alignment. The truth had simply reached its conclusion. Evelyn visited Elena in Clearhaven a week later. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She spoke at length, about fear, about decisions rationalized as necessary, about silence mistaken for protection. Elena listened without interruption. When Evelyn finished, she asked for forgiveness. Elena believed her regret was genuine, but incomplete. Forgiveness isn't a shortcut, Elena said evenly. It requires accountability. She set boundaries calmly, without negotiation. Evelyn accepted them reluctantly. In the weeks that followed, Elena worked closely with Eleanor to settle the estate. Each responsibility was handled deliberately, honoring Richard's intentions without bitterness. The process clarified something Elena had never fully allowed herself to acknowledge. Stability did not require approval. It required ownership. With the estate settled, Elena made a decision unencumbered by expectation. She chose distance, not out of anger but necessity. She relocated north to North Shore Haven, a quiet coastal town defined by early mornings and unclaimed space. There, she rebuilt her life with intention rather than reaction. Clarissa faded from her life entirely, consumed by consequences she had spent years avoiding. Evelyn maintained contact cautiously, learning how to exist without control. Elena found peace not in reconciliation, but in autonomy. Some endings did not arrive with noise. They arrived with resolve. North Shore Haven offered Elena something she had never truly experienced before: anonymity without loneliness. No one there knew her family name or its quiet power. No one expected her to perform competence or restraint on command. She rented a modest house overlooking a narrow inlet where the water moved slowly, as if even the tide respected the town's unhurried pace. Mornings arrived gently. Fog lifted without urgency. Silence felt earned rather than imposed. She continued her work remotely, restructuring her career in a way that reflected choice rather than obligation. The discipline that had always grounded her remained, but the tension that once accompanied success was gone. Her evenings were simple. Long walks along the shore, books read without interruption, meals prepared slowly with music low in the background. Nothing competed for her attention unless she invited it to. In that quiet, Elena began to notice how deeply her past had shaped her instincts. She still hesitated before speaking, still weighed decisions as though someone might object. The realization was not painful. It was instructive. Awareness softened habits that had once felt permanent. She practiced making choices without explanation. She trusted her judgment without waiting for permission. Each small act reinforced a truth she had never been allowed to internalize. North Shore Haven did not ask her to prove anything. It allowed her to exist without justification. Managing the estate continued quietly in the background. Elena honored Richard's wishes with precision rather than spectacle. She preserved the Whitmore home in Hawthorne Ridge, not as a symbol of nostalgia, but as an asset responsibly maintained. Properties that no longer served a purpose were liquidated. Investments were diversified thoughtfully. Each decision reflected restraint rather than excess. Ownership, she discovered, was not about control. It was about clarity. Eleanor Grant remained a steady presence, offering counsel without intrusion. Their conversations shifted over time, from strategy to reflection, from obligation to intention. Elena learned that responsibility did not require self-erasure. It required discernment. She declined invitations framed as reconciliation, but structured around denial. Distance was not punishment. It was protection. Extended family members reached out sporadically, curious rather than concerned. Elena responded politely and briefly. She did not explain. She did not defend. The story no longer belonged to public consumption. Silence, this time, was chosen. Evelyn contacted her occasionally. The tone was different now, measured, careful, stripped of assumption. She no longer spoke as though authority were implied. Conversations stayed practical. When apologies surfaced, Elena acknowledged them without reopening old wounds. Healing, she understood, did not require excavation of every fracture. It required consistency moving forward. Clarissa remained absent. Updates arrived secondhand. Details Elena chose not to pursue. Legal consequences unfolded quietly. Social circles shifted. The distance confirmed what Elena had already accepted. Some relationships did not end with closure. They ended with clarity. That understanding freed her from the impulse to fix what was never hers to repair. As seasons changed, Elena felt her identity recalibrate. She was no longer defined by what had been withheld from her, but by what she cultivated deliberately. She joined a small community group focused on financial literacy, offering guidance without seeking recognition. Teaching grounded her. It reminded her that contribution did not require sacrifice of self. Friendships formed slowly, organically. No one dominated conversations. No one disappeared. Balance was not accidental. It was mutual. In those relationships, Elena experienced belonging without performance. The realization brought relief rather than resentment. Her past no longer demanded explanation. It existed as context, not definition. One evening, standing by the water as dusk settled over North Shore Haven, Elena considered the arc of her life with calm detachment. The revelation that once threatened to erase her had instead clarified her worth. Richard's legacy had not rewritten her history, but it had validated her presence within it. She understood now that family was not determined by blood alone. Belonging was not granted by proximity or obligation. It was chosen, affirmed, protected through action. She turned back toward the house, its lights glowing softly, and felt certainty settle without ceremony. The life ahead was not an inheritance. It was a decision she continued to make each day. The call from Thomas Ridley came late one afternoon. Elena answered while standing at the kitchen counter. The window opened to the sound of water moving gently against the shore. "I wanted to confirm the final filings are complete," he said. "There will be no further legal actions from your sister." Elena exhaled slowly. "And the debts?" she asked. "They've been formally transferred," Thomas replied. "Your responsibility is concluded." She thanked him and ended the call, surprised by the absence of relief. What she felt instead was neutrality. The chapter had closed without ceremony. That evening, Eleanor visited North Shore Haven while passing through on unrelated business. They shared a simple meal at the small dining table, conversation unfolding easily. "You handled everything with restraint," Eleanor said. "Most people seek revenge when handed power." Elena shook her head. Revenge would have meant staying tethered. Eleanor smiled faintly. That's rarer than people think. They spoke about futures rather than outcomes. About intention instead of reaction. I want quiet that lasts, Elena said. And work that matters without consuming me. Eleanor raised her glass. That's a sensible ambition. When Eleanor left, Elena cleaned the table slowly. Nothing in her life felt unfinished. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was space reclaimed. Weeks later, Evelyn arrived unannounced. She stood uncertainly on the porch, hands folded. Elena hesitated briefly, then opened the door without urgency. They sat facing one another, the distance deliberate. I won't stay long, Evelyn said quickly. I just wanted to say something without asking anything in return. Elena nodded. I spent years believing silence was protection, Evelyn continued. It wasn't. It was cowardice. Elena did not interrupt. I failed you, Evelyn said. And I understand forgiveness isn't owed. Elena considered her carefully. I'm not withholding it, she said evenly. I'm choosing not to rush it. Evelyn accepted that without protest. They spoke briefly, then not at all. When Evelyn stood to leave, she paused. I hope you're happy here. I'm learning how, Elena replied. The door closed gently. There was no reconciliation. No fracture reopened. Just truth acknowledged without demand. Life settled into rhythm. Elena's work shifted toward advisory roles, mentoring younger professionals navigating careers without inherited safety. During one session, a client confessed, I feel like I don't belong anywhere I succeed. Elena answered without hesitation. Belonging isn't a reward, she said. It's a condition you create. The word surprised even her. Social connections in North Shore Haven deepened through shared effort rather than proximity. Dinners ended in laughter without hierarchy. No one competed. No one disappeared. Balance felt deliberate and earned. Occasionally, thoughts of Clarissa surfaced, not with anger, but detachment. Elena no longer wondered what might have been different. Envy, she realized, had shaped her sister's choices more than rivalry ever had. That understanding closed the final door quietly. One evening, Elena wrote a short letter to herself and sealed it in a drawer. It contained no blame, no defense, only acknowledgement of survival without bitterness. On the anniversary of Richard's death, she walked the shoreline alone. She spoke aloud, not to memory, but to certainty. You trusted me, she said into the wind. I'll keep proving you right. That night, Eleanor sent a brief message. You built something rare. Protect it. Elena smiled and turned off her phone. The past no longer interrupted her evenings. She cooked slowly, windows open, music low. The life she lived now did not require witnesses. It required presence. She reflected on the girl who once tried to earn space by shrinking. That version of herself felt distant, but honored. Growth had not erased her. It had integrated her. Inheritance, Elena understood, was not wealth transferred through documents. It was discernment earned through experience. The truth that once threatened to dismantle her had clarified her boundaries, her values, her direction. Nothing was missing. Nothing was owed. Elena Whitmore stood fully within a life chosen deliberately, unburdened by secrecy, free from obligation. She had not won against her family. She had stepped beyond them. As night settled over North Shore Haven, Elena turned off the lights and let the quiet hold. Being overlooked had sharpened her vision, not diminished her worth. Some families teach love through presence. Others teach strength through absence. She had learned both. And in that knowledge, she found freedom that did not need to announce itself. Thank you for watching this story. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. If this story resonated with you, it may be because you've carried silence longer than you should have. Remember this: truth does not erase you, distance is not failure, and sometimes choosing yourself is the most honest ending of all.